And I want to welcome everyone to today's e-showcase, Top Security Risk Facing Water and Wastewater Utilities. I'd like to thank Claroty and Schneider Electric for sponsoring today's event. Today's presenters are Grant Geyer, Chief Product Officer with Claroty, Andrew Nix, Operational Cybersecurity Solutions and Services Manager, America, Schneider Electric, and Admiral Michael S. Rogers, retired, Chairman, Board of Advisors. And now I will hand the presentation to our presenters.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone on the call. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're here today to discuss the top cybersecurity risks facing water and wastewater utilities. And I'm joined today by a couple of great colleagues that have an enormous experience in cybersecurity. We'll take a moment to introduce each of us. Mike, would you like to kick it off? Sorry, Mike, can you hear me?
I can, although you're very low again.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Let me try to fix it here. In the meantime, Mike, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, Mike Rogers, retired U.S. Navy Admiral. I was the director of the National Security Agency and the commander of U.S. Cyber Command in my final duty, so heavily involved in cyber, both defensively and offensively, and now the chairman of the board of advisors for Claroty.
Great. And just checking again, how's my audio?
Better,
but still soft. So
it seems like if you keep yourself about half a foot from the screen, you're good, Grant.
Okay, I'll do my. I'm here in Tel Aviv. That's why you see it's dark outside. I'll do my best to speak up a little bit. So I'm Grant Geyer. I'm the Chief Product Officer for Claroty. I run our product management, engineering, and our research teams. Been in cybersecurity on the vendor side for the past 25 years, and Claroty has been a real passion project of mine, especially in the water and wastewater sector, given some of the existential risks in the sector and the fact that historically, a lot of the water and wastewater organizations have been under-resourced and represent a real target for attackers given the digital convergence that's going on. And with that, Andrew, I will turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
All right, everybody. Good afternoon and good morning. Just briefly, I'm Andrew Nix. I'm here physically in Houston, Texas, and I am Schneider Electric's Operational Cybersecurity Solutions and Services Manager for North and South America. We're really here today because Schneider Electric is uniquely positioned in that we manufacture a lot of the equipment that keeps water and wastewater infrastructure running. And so it's particularly interesting for us, and we feel our responsibility to talk about how to secure not only the equipment, the Schneider equipment that's in facilities, but everything else that's there and everything that interacts with everything else, because it's not just a single device or a single system that you're protecting, it's everything, start to finish. And so we're here to discuss some kind of tips and tricks in that space and ways that we feel you can get the most out of your equipment and the most out of your processes and your people.
Great. So I'm going to continue. If my audio is choppy, I'm going to try to dial in. But for now, let's kind of soldier on. So context, right? Back in 2021, in late 2021, Claroty decided to fund a anonymous survey of asset owners and operators to try to get a sense on a number of key topics with respect to security and risk management in many different segments. And really, we were kind of astounded at the feedback. We debated as to whether we would cover ransomware as a topic because so much has been written about ransomware. Felt like there was nothing more that we could learn about it. But regardless, it was kind of like a last minute thing. We threw in the questions anyway, and we were really astounded at the feedback from the users. So we had about 1,600 respondents to the survey, and we sliced the responses by vertical. And when you see here, like I just pulled up a number of different stats. Again, this was conducted in Q3 of 2021. We published the results in February of 2022. Basically, if you look at this slide, 75% of water and wastewater respondents said that they had been impacted with ransomware that either hit their IT environment, their OT environment, or both within the 2021 timeframe. And even though there's a cyber incident reporting bill now that's been passed by Congress, nobody expected to see that the numbers were this high in terms of impact to the industry. And building on this point, when you look at the scope of operations, basically about 50% of individuals responding said that one site had been impacted, while an additional of 40% said that there had been substantial impact, some less than a week, others more than a week. So it's not just that there have been a lot of attacks within ransomware attacks, but the impact on operations has been great, and also the downtime cost. Basically, about 37% said that that the impact was over $500,000 per hour. Now, one stat that I didn't pull into this presentation is about 60% of respondents paid the ransom. And it really kind of speaks to the state that we're in right now, that a lot of attackers recognize that when public safety is at risk, they put the asset owner operators between a rock and a hard place. And that's exactly what they're doing is trying to ensure that the asset owner operators are forced to either pay the ransom or risk not having a water supply that they can provide to their users. So we were
Grant,
really,
one other thought, if I could.
yeah, please.
I thought it was also interesting on that first slide with the data that almost 11% of respondents were unsure if they had experienced a ransomware event. I don't know exactly what that means, but I'm surprised by that. You know, in my experience,
Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
I was going to say, in my experience, look, it's pretty clear if you've had an event. But Andrew, hey, you might have a perspective.
Actually, it is interesting. So this is something I can speak to, and we've seen this in water, wastewater utilities before, where there are signs of potentially someone moving around in a network, having access that was unconfirmed. There's events that have happened that they're not really that folks aren't really sure how they started. There's not a root cause analysis. There's nothing in place that enables folks to understand what happened and identify the root cause of a problem and definitively rule it out. And that is, I think, where this almost 11% comes from, where it's like, well, we saw something, but I don't know exactly what it was. It's kind of like the Bigfoot video, right? There's something there, but what exactly is that? And that's this 11%, I think, where there's not certainty of whether or not something has breached. And I think from my perspective, that's one of the scariest statistics, right? Because that means somebody could still be there. Somebody could be snooping around, could be making changes without folks noticing, could be gathering information, and producing a plan of attack of their own, be it financial or operational, and no one knows what to do about it or if it's even a real risk. And so I think that's a huge red flag.
Yeah, I have to admit, along those lines, in my previous life, we would observe state actors would often attempt to gain and sustain long-term access to critical infrastructure like water and wastewater, with a view towards not necessarily manipulating ransomware or some visible impact, but rather just to sustain access over time.
Yeah, and typically, from my limited knowledge of nation state actors, typically there's an access team and an exploit team, where the access team's responsibility is, in essence, to leverage whatever tools necessary. Sometimes there are common tools available to get a foothold within the environment. And then an exploit team would then have the responsibility, if they chose at a time and place to then cause impact to the asset, that's the exploit team's responsibility. One other point that I thought was pretty interesting here is when you look at, again, in a different segment, in the pipeline segment, the Colonial Pipeline breach, a lot of people say that that was an OT breach. It wasn't, right? It was that the IT environment was impacted, but the security team at Colonial Pipeline couldn't positively state that the OT systems weren't breached, and so they had to shut down the pipeline at the same time. And so one of the areas that comes to mind with convergence of IT and OT systems is that more and more frequently there will be attacks in IT environments, and if there's not good segmentation built in, or a pretty good certainty that OT was impacted, there may be a need to do the same, to shut down the OT aspect of the environment, even though only, from what is known by the security team, only IT is impacted.
Yeah, and one last comment there that I think is that just to lay, building on Mike's comment as well. If you dive into tools like Shodan and some of the trackers that show this information, and really the truly the industry that's behind attacks on infrastructure, it's really fascinating because you can see drops of when they're taking their lunch breaks, when they're taking weekends, the holidays, how that impacts the number of attacks and the frequency. I mean, this is an industry of their own. And so it's their best interest to try to be untraceable, to try to learn what they can without being detected, and gather, whether it's just gathering information. We've seen folks, breach into OT environments to just quietly run, crypto miners in the background where they don't think people will notice, and just make money off of your power. Things of that nature. It's a widely spreading industry of itself, of quietly finding a spot where they can cause some sort of impact or gain financial gain for themselves.
Yeah, and I think when you look at both the prevalence of attacks on this slide as well as the impact, it clearly is a multi-billion-dollar industry for the attackers, and hence why it's what everyone's dealing with. Mike and Andrew, before I move on, do you guys have any commentary on this slide that you wanted to add?
The only thing I was going to add, and it's a little bit more to the previous one, it shows you that the adversaries increasingly don't recognize this IT-OT differentiation, and their view is both represent attractive potential avenues to access the industrial control side, or the SCADA elements or the control features of a network. And I don't see that changing. I mean, I think that's the world we're living in.
Yeah,
the one thing that I will say when it comes to this slide on the right and the cost of downtime, I mean, it's interesting how, again, Schneider, we have kind of a unique viewpoint of dealing with all sorts of different industries, and we see the variation of, strict cost or immediate cost for the, for a, an impact by cyber, ransomware, things like that. In fact, in the logistics industry, we have a major customer who's claimed that their plants are processing 140,000 packages an hour, and downtime costs them up to $40 million an hour. But what's interesting is that's pretty limited to their specific locations. When you relay that into the water infrastructure, man, downtime of water has immediate financial cost, of course, but also life safety cost for those that are downstream users of that, users of water. It has operational costs to any number of different organizations in that industry, because they may use that as a source for cooling, as a source for manufacturing product. It has all sorts of different implications that go well beyond just the organization itself. And then, of course, there's, if other types of impacts, kind of impact the actual, chemical layout of that, water product itself, that could have, boil notices, clear the lines, testing for days. There's a lot of impact that goes beyond just, I have to reset this PLC or what have you in this industry. And that's where we're seeing attackers are recognizing that and using that to their advantage.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent transition point, Andrew, to talk a little bit about a case study. So it's one thing to show the broad statistics. It's another to look at the case that much has been talked about, but I think it's worth reviewing as a part of this discussion around the attack on the Oldsmar water treatment facility. In essence, it's a very not a super complicated attack. An attacker was able to use old credentials that were available on the dark web of an employee that had no longer been working at Oldsmar, but his credentials had not been deprecated, and was able to get access via TeamViewer, which is a remote access tool, where they were using simple username and password and not multi-factor authentication or not two-factor authentication. And this is a case, look, while water systems have a myriad of safety and control systems to ensure that events, that we limit the events that could impact public safety. In this case, we had a smart operator and that was a good, what I'll call, first line of defense, and he actually saw the cursor moving across his screen and changing the levels of lye in the water from 100 parts per million up to 11,000 parts per million, and brought that to his management, and they were able to cut off the remote access line, stop the attack. Now, what I think is really interesting about this case is it both points out the simplicity of attacks, right? This was not a super complicated 0 day, like 0 days are super sexy, but it was not a 0 day that was used to get access. Basically, the attacker, by getting credentials that were not deprecated, was in essence able to walk through the digital front door of the organization and get access to an engineering workstation where they attempted to the control systems to change the levels of lye and contaminate the water. And so that's kind of one point, is it was not a very sophisticated attack and could have been easily prevented. A second point is that only weeks prior, 3 weeks prior, an attack happened on a water utility, water treatment plant in Northern California. The name is not known publicly. And the attack vector was exactly the same that the attacker used, getting old credentials and using them to get access into the control systems in the facility. And so what really kind of highlighted is that the Oldsmar team, without any regulatory obligation or legal obligation, went out and spoke and brought in law enforcement and brought all this information in front of the Water ISAC, spoke publicly about the event, and put the whole water industry on notice. And I think we'll talk in a second about the importance of what legislation has resulted from some of these attacks that could potentially impact public safety.
Yeah, I thought it's also interesting. Not only was the attacker working this remotely, but the on the network owner or user structure, it was remote, oversight, if you will, that ultimately identified it as well. I think that is an interesting dimension for the future, as increasingly we look at more autonomous means of controlling and operating systems. I don't see that changing. And I would also love to better understand it was compromised credentials. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that there could have been a valid user whose credentials were also compromised, meaning two entities could try to use the same identity. I would be interested, was this a set of credentials that was compromised in the sense that it was a no longer valid user, but they kept it in the system anyway? Be interesting to see from a defensive practice standpoint.
Yeah, it actually was. It was a employee that had retired from the organization, and I don't know whether it was the OT staff or the IT staff, but the user's credentials were not taken out of the system, and as if it was a valid employee. As a result of Oldsmar and Colonial and these other events, not surprisingly, the government has stepped in, and that's the role the government plays, is that when there's a risk to public safety, economic safety, national security, the government has a role to play in terms of helping to deal with that risk, that existential risk that is presented to the market. And a number of things have happened over the past year. The Biden administration has put in place a 100-day sprint in a number of sectors, including the electric sector, oil and natural gas, water and waste, and now the chemical sector as well. And you don't sprint when things are going great, right? The fact that they're sprinting suggests that there's a gap that needs to be addressed. In addition to that, there's been, the EPA has also worked on having some action plans and accelerating work. Congress has passed a bill that requires organizations of critical infrastructure organizations to report to CISA within 72 hours if they're hit with a material attack, and if they pay a ransom, they have to notify Congress within 24 hours. And just, I kind of think about this, what you can't measure, you can't manage. And so I think for CISA and government, for the first time, there's a legal obligation to start to get a size and shape of the problem so that companies like Clarity don't have to do surveys to understand how prevalent ransomware is, but there's a legal obligation, a regulatory obligation to provide that information. I think that'll enable policymakers and the SEC and other entities to better help ensure that we are properly addressing the challenge. And I don't think this is the end of it. I think that there's going to be a lot more that the executive branch and Congress will do to help support the water and wastewater industry.
Yeah, I think we should view the actions taken by government to date as just an initial investment, so to speak, an initial focus. I will say, as a guy who used to be part of the government team and used to be part of these efforts, I always found the sprint focus troublesome to me. It encouraged, on the positive side, it gave you prioritization and focus. The downside is we would just do sprints all the time. And quite frankly, you'd focus on a topic for 30 days, you'd declare victory, and then you'd move on. And as I look at issues like, look at water and wastewater cybersecurity or security more broadly, this is a long-term effort to get where we need to be. This idea that you can just sprint on this for 1 to 6 months, declare victory, and move on. I just think that tends to give you a false and unrealistic sense of optimism. Plus, look, this is a hard sector because so many of its elements are very small plants, many of whom don't have full-time IT, full-time expertise. We need to figure out how we get them more expertise, how we get them access to resources, how we work more collectively to try to address this problem set, in my view, anyway.
Yeah. Okay, and so the question is, like, we've talked about the statistics writ large, we talked about the Oldsmar use case, but the question, if we step back, is that we ask ourselves is, what's going on here, right? And the move that's in play essentially is that everything is becoming digitized, and what were once separate islands of OT and IT, based upon the need to drive more efficiency, are getting connected. And some would say, well, no, we shouldn't be connecting them. It's in my mind, it's not a question of if, it's a question of how you do it securely, right? Because the efficiencies to be gained for all of the utility sectors are so great that the benefits can't be overlooked, right? So the question isn't should you or shouldn't you, it's how you do it securely and how you do it effectively. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to Andrew from Schneider, who's going to talk a little bit about Schneider's lens, having so many water and wastewater customers and being leaders in this sector, how they think about cybersecurity and how to protect oneself given the risk environment that the segment is dealing with. Andrew, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Grant. So we're going to move into some recommendations, and just as a lead into this, so as Grant said, I think he's spot on. I mean, digitization and connectivity of devices is here to stay. It's always improving. You're doing more with your data, and we should be. This is very important. This is good for efficiency, for sustainability, for standardization. And if you don't participate in that, then eventually you'll be left behind. There is not much equipment that's being planned or made that doesn't have this level of connectivity. Everyone agrees it's the right thing, but it comes with that knowledge that it has to be secured and deployed correctly. And so what I'd like to do, if we can move forward one slide, is just kind of give an introduction into a couple resources that are available. This is a bit high level because we only got a few minutes, but give you some reading points, some starting points that you can take back to your organization, some actions that you can leave with, because we didn't want to come in here and talk about all the problems and then just kind of say, all right, have a nice afternoon. So with that said, there's a standard that we'll talk about that's a great starting point. There's a couple actual, points that you can take back, notes that you can write down and bring back to the organization, and we'll tell you kind of how we've done that and been successful in that in the past. So the first thing that I'll say is AWWA has a lot of great content around cybersecurity landscape and architecture and connectivity specific to the water industry. However, we use the IEC 62443 standard quite a bit because it is built by industry leaders across all industries, built by the end users themselves, with inputs from regulators, with inputs from manufacturers in different sections, and it's quite complete in the scope that it has for protecting you against different levels of attackers, depending on how important and exposed you feel like there are. So just kind of to give you a background on what it is, within this document, there are 4 levels of cybersecurity assurance. There's the basic, which is, accidental, right? So somebody, makes a mistake, has a little bit too much access maybe, and does something that is an unintentional breach, right? Then we start getting into more focused things. Level 2, where it's, simple means, low resources, an individual person, or what we might call a script kiddie, that's bought some tool that's trying to automate and just see what they can hit without much energy if they, just casting the line and seeing what they reel in, right? Then we get into level 3. This is where it gets pretty serious, right? So these are focused, resourced attacks with skilled adversaries. These are professional attackers or hackers. And in that space, we're really starting to get into the areas where, we see a lot of impact on water, wastewater, where there's specific attacks on infrastructure. And then we really get into security level 4. This is the big one, right? These are nation state level attacks against highly motivated, highly skilled, highly resourced adversaries. So a government or large organization that's chartered to attack certain industries or cause national level or regional or community level pain to an organization or a group of people. Now, full disclosure, it is very difficult to stand yourself up to security level 4, and I can see Mike nodding his head, Grant nodding his head. We all agree that's very difficult to achieve on a day-to-day basis, but it's something that I feel we should aim for. And if we achieve a level along the way, we at least know where we stand and we know what we're capable of defending ourselves against. So we see a lot of organizations aiming for level 4, achieving level 3, and that's kind of a good spot to keep them progressing forward. They're always looking for how can we be a little bit more effective, a little bit more efficient, but we know that we're capable against professional attackers and with moderate motivation. Now, with that said, IEC 62443 is great. It lays all of this out, but it's hundreds of pages long. It's very complex and complicated. It's not dinner table reading or the magazine that you keep in the bathroom. It's very complex and not something somebody can pick up and just understand right off the bat. And so what we wanted to do, if we can go forward one slide, is just distill this down into a couple starting points, some things that you can take away right now, bring to your organizational leaders, and talk about a few points that just get you off the ground and into the right zone of being a defendable organization. And of course, organizations like Claroty-Schneider, we can help you with this. We can help lay this out so that you understand where to start, what you've already done successfully, where the gaps might be. But let's talk through some of these points just quickly here. The first one is regular cybersecurity assessments. This is critical. We actually do a lot of these assessments using one of the Claroty tools called Edge that is focused on asset inventory, because if you don't know what's out there and you don't know about it, it's very difficult to defend yourself, because how do I know that I don't have devices that are 10 years old and using old firmware? Or I woke up in the morning and saw Log4j on the news and, oh my God, how am I impacted? Knowing what's out there is fundamental to what, how you defend yourself and how you defend your organization, especially as you grow and modernize and you have new equipment interacting with old and new sites and you're acquiring different equipment. That's critical. Segmentation is also very important in creating what we call a demilitarized zone, or DMZ. And that's keeping your, your IT network and your OT network more separated, so that OT, the core function and operations of your facility can keep running if there's something that happened in the IT zone. And Grant talked about that a little bit earlier and the importance of that. And we've seen that with numerous attacks where it spreads down into the OTs from other areas of the network. And that gives you a little bit of segmentation as well from if a particular device or area of the network is impacted, you can isolate that and still operate the rest of your facility normally or safely, knowing that you've got something quarantined and contained, right? We all know how quarantines work now. The same applies in OT environments as well. Then we start getting into other things that are kind of more basic and in the environment itself, day-to-day things you can change. The first is backing up data, and this is important that it's done automatically and regularly. I can't tell you how many times we've gone into chemical plants and power facilities and all sorts of different things, data centers, where we go in and see that the backups that they have are 6 months old or not complete. It's only for a core system. It's not for everything. And so if something were to happen there, how do you actually get back up and running? Have you practiced that? Do you see the potential impact and have validated that your backups are complete or accurate or executable? So it's not just files sitting somewhere that don't actually get you back up and running. Because there's nothing more off-putting to an attacker than someone who is going to be back up and running quickly. If they can't get damage to you, if they can't cause you financial or operational pain, why do they care? They're going to go on to the next person. And so that's a really important point. Organizing into zones, again, you've got like for like, so that if something is impacted, you can isolate that, correct it while keeping other things going and moving smoothly. Anything that's super critical, source codes, specific one-off softwares, things that are maybe obsolete but still have to be used. Those types of files and details we need to store in multiple places so that they can't be destroyed or lost, because man, that could be a really good good way for an attacker to cause you damage if they know that it's something that can't be replaced quickly. The other thing I'll say here is train, and practice. Just like a fire drill. You know where to go, you know where your muster point is, you know who your safety buddy is, whatever we call it in an organization, you know that. But from a cyber standpoint, many folks don't. We haven't practiced it or drilled it in a facility of what happens if this goes down, who has responsibility, who takes ownership of that. And that's something that we have to practice from a cybersecurity standpoint as well. And when we talk about training, I'm not necessarily talking about that 1 hour online course that everybody goes through once a year, right? To say, don't click on the funny looking email and all this sort of stuff. It's job specific training. So how could you, as a user of that, or a person impacting that facility, working in that facility, actually go in and make sure that you're not doing anything that might impact the facility. So if you're walking around the plant floor and you plug your cell phone into a workstation, boy, that could be an actual risk that the organization isn't prepared for. And so having that training of knowing the potential impact is very, very important. And then the last thing here that I'll say, and then we'll move on to one more thing for you on the next slide, is use the NIST framework, NIST 800 framework, and have at least one tool, one technology from each cybersecurity pillar that they've laid out and keep them up to date. Keep your technologies moving forward. Keep them in practice. So let's go into what that means a little bit. So we've got here on the side a little layout of kind of the different layers of security, and we see physical security, of course, keeping people physically out or controlled from that standpoint is important. Policies and procedures, that's where we get into our controls, our written controls, and our procedural controls from standards like 62443 that we discussed, like networking standards, things of that nature. Firewall and architectures that help you with that. Segmentation that we talked about before, the control pathway of data. Policies that do the same. Account management that makes sure folks are controlled in the way that they're accessing things. If I only need access to one particular part of my network, I shouldn't be given access to the whole thing. I don't need to be able to see the SCADA system from the receptionist's desk. And so having account controls over who can access what is very important in making sure that an attacker can't get into a workstation and find other parts of the network that are attractive to them that you didn't know were necessarily connected. And then updating and keeping things modern is very important as well. This is a 24/7 enterprise for attackers. They're constantly looking at what's the next best thing they can do. And so we have to be as proactive as we can, but very, very reactive as well on keeping things up to date with the latest patches as well as we can. I mean, we understand that this is an OT environment. We're not going to take a PLC offline and stop water production or treatment just because we've got to update a patch this afternoon. But planning and scheduling of that becomes very, very important now in 2022. So let's move forward, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the best practices and keys that you can take away for stopping these attacks. We'll go forward one slide.
Andrew, just a couple of quick points.
Oh, sure. Sorry, Grant.
Yeah, a couple of points I wanted to make. We talked about resources. You mentioned AWWS, tabletop exercises.
Grant, your audio's dropped out again, unfortunately.
Any better?
No. But let's keep moving, and we can come back to that, Grant, in just a second. So let's summarize this up. What can we do, from a general standpoint, to talk about a pathway to cyber confidence? And I see some of the comments. There's all sorts of depth that we can go into here, and we could literally talk for weeks straight on specific standards, specific methodologies, specific protocols, product standards and tools and best practices. But as a way to get off the ground and take things back and really be impactful today, this is a starting point that we use to determine, if you feel like you are up to speed with, the industry kind of minimum standards to keep cybersecurity going and to have a cybersecurity culture in your environment. And the first thing is, again, that IEC 62443, AWWA, risk tools. They give you a really good, ability to kind of baseline where you are and what you're doing versus what the industry's doing. Because again, a lot of these attackers, they're not looking necessarily for you in your facility. They don't know you. They're looking for an opening, an unpatched device, a misconfigured, switch or firewall, something they can use to get in. They'll figure out who you are later, but their entry point is just what mistakes have people made. And those, evaluation tools can help you figure out where you are versus the chemical plant down the road versus, the, pumping, lift station in the next county over. And those make a difference in knowing, if you're more secure than them, you're a less attractive target. Training and enforcement, we talked about that just a moment ago. Go beyond the minimum, mandated. Make sure that you're doing role-based so that folks understand their impact and what they could possibly what they can do to reduce the risk of the facility in their role, whatever it is. Everybody has some impact. And then the 7 cyber fundamentals for water wastewater. And again, we talked a little bit about these before, but I just want to make them very clear and lay them out, not in a particular order, but it does kind of help to follow this, this path. So asset inventories, again, fundamental. If you don't know what's there, we don't necessarily know how to defend it. If assessing risks through risk assessments, through cybersecurity audits to understand what we can achieve, where we need to go, where the gaps are, and what we're already doing well, where we've already invested and gotten good returns. We don't need to to do any more in, so you don't overspending. Minimizing exposure through your segmentation, through use of demilitarized zones, through use of firewalls, access controls, making sure folks don't have too much visibility, safeguarding from an authorized physical access. That's of course fundamental from the ground up, making sure that you've got physical controls in place, or physical security controls, independent cyber physical safety systems to to help make sure that you are in control of what's going out there. And then just to wrap up, embracing vulnerability management and bringing that in as a culture of success in your company, understanding that you're you are an organization that needs to be defended because you do something valuable. So last thing that I'll say, we'll move forward, is it's okay to ask for help here. There's a lot of folks out there that feel like they really need to do it themselves, or they're not comfortable asking, or what should I be doing? There's a lot of vendors, there's a lot of OEMs like ourselves who are happy to talk about what we do and what we see others do. And so I think that's a key area of success, as well as ask for help. Ask your neighbors, ask others in the industry. because we're all in this together to make sure that we keep, our infrastructure and our country moving forward. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip forward and we'll skip over my my next slide here because I think we've really talked about that in the last couple of minutes, and we'll move on and I'll toss it back over to Mike.
Sure. And so really, this is our kind of take-home slide. It's just designed to highlight the Clarity and the Schneider focus on water and wastewater, how important we think that this is such a core element. Clarity tries to bring a series of capabilities that are to provide you as an operator greater knowledge and insight on the cybersecurity side. Schneider brings deep knowledge on water technology and the platforms that operate it, as well as cybersecurity. And one of the reasons why we're doing this together is we've had great success in partnering as kind of an integrated team to ask ourselves, hey, look, how can we both more efficiently operate water and wastewater systems, but also how can we ensure their cybersecurity? And that's really the focus of our discussion today. And I want to make one last comment on the good insights from Andrew. Remember, in the end, cybersecurity is about integrating systems, capabilities, technologies, people, and processes. There is no one single thing that fixes everything. And so you always got to ask yourself, look, so I've created this cybersecurity ecosystem focused on the ability to successfully work my water and wastewater infrastructure. And so you got to constantly, as a cybersecurity professional, ask yourself, so what do I need to update? What do I need to train? What do I need to monitor? I wish that was as simple as do these things and then you're never going to have to do any work again. And that's not what Andrew was trying to say. But I always try to remind people, remember, cybersecurity is a sustained, focused set of activities. And you got to stay after it. And you have to monitor what you're doing and the kind of things and actions that you've taken that Andrew highlighted. Andrew, anything else from your perspective? We're down to just a couple minutes.
No, I think you said it well, Mike. I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, like I said, we Schneider are in this journey with you, right? We have over 230 manufacturing facilities of our own, and our goal is the same. We don't want to be in the news. We don't want an issue. We want to be safe and secure and produce our product. The same is true with water. And so, we've done a lot of research into what's out there. We partner with what we feel are the best in the industry. And we're happy to share any insights that we can with folks on what they can do to be more secure, more defendable. And I think that's a core competency of our cybersecurity consulting group.
And Grant, let's do a sound check. Are you working?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Take us home, baby.
Yeah, no, it's been really great working with the Schneider Electric team over the past several years. They bring true expertise to the table and really understand both OT environments. They understand cyber and can help from an engagement methodology perspective to ensure that your organizations can implement cybersecurity effectively. If it's okay, we have, I think, just a couple of minutes left. I wanted to address a couple of questions that come in, or one of the questions that came in. There was a question around, is there any type of seal of approval that the government is looking at in order to ensure that assets are cyber safe? And I'll take that one. So the Biden administration, in Executive Order 14028, which was the cybersecurity executive order that came out in 2021, directed NIST to look at the equivalent of an Energy Star approval or Energy Star branding to make sure OT assets are cyber safe, or IoT assets are cyber safe. So if you think about how successful Energy Star is, it was a government program meant to say, look, if your oven or your appliance is energy efficient at this standard, you can put the brand on it. And that was a way of encouraging the whole electronics industry to make their appliances more energy efficient, and also recognize it's a win-win for both the manufacturers as well as the consumers, so that they could buy more energy efficient tools. And the same idea is being applied here. And so NIST is in the middle of looking at what would need to be done to have an IoT cyber safe brand on IoT devices. So it's still in the works right now at NIST.
And hey, Grant, I like that one question out there about, hey, how big do you need to be to start thinking about cyber? Because the reality is so many of the actors in this space are running incredibly small, often not particularly automated systems with a really small number. I mean, I have a family friend, for example, who is the sole individual for the water for a small town where my wife grew up. And I often kid him, he's doing everything by himself and very little of it is really automated. Andrew, any thought on that one from your perspective?
Yeah, so just the quick answer is any and all. I mean, like I said earlier, it doesn't really matter how advanced or unadvanced you are. Attackers are just generally scoping to see what they can find, any open issues, any unpatched systems. And if you're using older equipment, it's more than likely maybe out of supportability, and that opens up a lot of risks. And so we're not, hackers aren't just looking for the big names in water. In fact, they recognize that smaller organizations are more likely to pay and just move on. They don't want the bad press. And so, they have whole strategists in their industry that are doing analysis on their best attack points, and generally that comes out to a wide mix of different sizes and customers, or sizes and deployed technologies. So I don't think there's an organization that's too small or too big to be targeted, too simple or too advanced. It's all about finding the right starting point and the right coverage for you in your specific environment that makes most sense to you and is manageable and maintainable for what you're doing.
Andrew, I'll just throw into that the key is to ensure that you are looking at a security strategy that's built about where you are in your organization, where your organization is in its cybersecurity journey. One of the criticisms personally I have about the 100-day sprint, it was very focused on monitoring, and I kind of feel like that's a college level course for a lot of organizations that really need kind of the 101 level course. And so the key, I think, is really understand where you are in the journey and be clear about what the next steps are. For many organizations, that's not security monitoring yet. That's around asset visibility, vulnerability management, multi-factor authentication, tabletop exercises, right? Getting kind of the basics right enables you to have a foundation that at some point you can get monitoring in place. But it's I think a bridge too far for many organizations. Okay, listen, we appreciate everyone's time today. It's been a great set of questions and audience. We deeply appreciate it, and we hope this webinar has been valuable. From Andrew, Mike, and myself, we're here to help. Between Schneider Electric and Claroty, we have expertise in OT, expertise in cybersecurity, and can help meet you on your journey to help prevent attacks against your infrastructure. Thank you very much. Click on the QR code if you'd like to learn more, and we'd be eager to get in touch with you and have a chat.
And keep defending, everybody. Keep defending.
And just a quick note: if you had a question that we weren't able to address and ran out of time, if you would scan this QR code, you can submit it through that form, and we'll get back to you and make sure that you're feeling comfortable. So thank you all. I appreciate the time and the questions and the participation, and we'll talk again soon.
This was great. Grant, Andrew, Mike, thanks for a great presentation. And thank you to Claroty and Schneider Electric for sponsoring today's event. This actually concludes today's eShowcase. Thank you all for attending. The recording will be available at webfiresguide.wef.org. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with that link. And please visit our event calendar to sign up for future events.
And we're off. Hey, Grant, you might want to follow up with Mac McCormick, that one attendee.
I was just about to send him a note.
Yeah. Good job, Andrew. Good job, Grant.
Thank you. And I think Abhinav Roy is a Schneider employee in a different part of the organization, so I was just looking him up.
All right. Be good, everybody.
Let's get him a demo. Thank you.
Hey, Beth, can you take the action on Mac McCormick, find out who he is?
Yes, I'll do that.
Okay, if you could send a note to him and CC me. That'd be great.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Okay, bye.